It's the association. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Peter Partington, Vice Chair. Now being 2:04, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Infrastructure Task Force. Could we call the meeting to order? Could we call the roll, please?
Mr. Angeli?
Here.
Mr. Burnett?
Here.
Mr. Braxton?
Here.
Here.
Mr. Lambert?
Here.
Martin?
Here.
Mr. Ransford? Mr. Waffles?
Here.
Zelman?
Here.
So the first item is the approval of the agenda. Before I go on and ask for a motion on that, we at the last meeting a request to have the status of the construction of the police station on this agenda was made. It does not appear on this agenda, but I would like to ask the task force agreement to add that item, status of the police station construction, because we have Anthony Fajardo here to address that, and it would be placed. I would suggest it be placed under old business as the first item. So everything else under old business moved down one. First item is the status of the police station. So with that said, can I have a motion to that effect? Okay. Second, you get that? Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's said. Then the next item is approval of the previous meeting minutes of meeting August 5th, 2024. Any additions, corrections, comments?
Move to approve the minutes with
Roosevelt.
that.
Moved and seconded. Any comments, amendments, questions? If not, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So the first item is my Anthony's here. Status of the police station.
Thanks, Peter. Anthony, my name's Anthony Fajardo. For those of you who have not met me before, I'm an assistant city manager in the city of Lauderdale. As Peter said, I was asked to do a presentation. So what I was going to do is just do the same presentation that I gave to the city commission. If you had any questions, I could try and get into them. I do want to preface all this with I'm not an engineer and I'm not an architect, so I can give you the information that I have. If there's anything that we need to follow up with, I can definitely circle back around. So basically, this goes through just a little bit of the project status, kind of give you an idea of where it is. I want to get into a little bit of the deflection and the history, so you can kind of get an idea of where we started, where we got to. I'll discuss a little bit about the peer reviews that we're looking at, the one that we've done and the other one that we're looking to do, as well as go through the basics of the structural enhancements and then just have questions after that. I remember we have a small enough group. So basically, the project is around 50%. It's a little over 50%. You can see these are some of the big ticket line items: architectural precast, block masonry, is main buildings 100%, main roofs at about 80%. I'll get into a little bit more about the roof and why it stopped at 80%. We get into the deflection issue itself. Glazing is also at 75%. It's also been stopped with the deflection issue. Drywall stopped 30, elevator installation 50%. Parking garage, the construction of the parking garage is pretty much done. Shooting range has got about 75% stucco and 85% of the electrical ongoing. And then the rest of the site work is just kind of ongoing. So they've completed the vault for FPL and it's been accepted. The asphalt paving has started. Utility tie-ins are completed by this month. And then there's a temporary radio shelter that we're still working on, which is kind of tied into the demolition of the older building, which I can get into. Okay. So basically the reason all this started, back in March, there was an RFI from Moss Associates. Moss Associates is the company that's constructing the project. So we have a contract with them, right? So they had gotten to the point where this cantilever portion of the building, and I'll show a graphic in a second, this cantilever portion of the building was being filled in with glazing. They were wrapping the glazing around the building. Their subcontractor, all the openings were specified dimension, and there was a dimension of the glass being put in that got to the point where the glass just wouldn't fit. So they're asking why? What do we do, right? So basically what happened was the portion of the cantilever on the roof, and the roof only, and I think that's very important because the third floor slab is also cantilevered, but it didn't move at all. The roof bent down a little bit, reducing the size of the opening, the glass wouldn't fit. It became a real issue for us, not necessarily because it might be a catastrophic structural failure that could cause injury or something worse, but that over time, if that deflection continued to occur and we had the glass in place, it would dislodge the glass, allowing infiltration of water, creating the same kind of issues we've seen in other buildings here. So basically, right after that was identified, Thornton Tomasetti, who's the engineer of record, as a sub to AECOM, who's the architect of record, they developed a corrective measure, and I'll get into the details of that in just a minute. They had meetings held with Building Services Division immediately. This all happened in March. Thornton Tomasetti developed a corrective design, and that was turned to based on the reviews from our engineering. Our building services team started. However, in April, after the hearing time for all the concrete had passed, we found that the deflection was still occurring. Very, very tiny amounts. So then we felt it was very necessary for us to bring in a third party. So we brought in what I'll refer to as our first third party. So basically, we reached out to Lactus, Gohalheim Engineering, like I started. And they were basically brought in to look at the design, collaborate with Thornton Tomasetti, and come up with supplemental improvements that would address this in a more holistic manner. It's the confidence level. So more meetings held, an initial report by LYE. And then in June, temporary shoring was put on the building. So you can see that now. You're driving down Broward Boulevard, you see all the temporary shoring going from the ground up to the bottom of the third floor, through the third floor up to the first. So engineering designs for additional structural enhancement was under development. June, July, we had supplemental recommendations that had been submitted to the city for review. They were spec'd out. It's like this is kind of the direction we're going. So those were all held with the building services team. AECOM, LIE, and Building Services granted a exception for certain work to occur in that area. So what was happening is we'd gotten to the point where Moss had done a lot of work, and they did a great job of this, by the way, to reorganize the work that they were doing on the property so that they could accommodate no work happening in the deflection area. So basically, they shifted around the schedules and moving from a different area of the building over to this area and kind of. But they got to the point where the interior needed to be air conditioned so they can continue that interior work. So they had this question: can we do this work? And we wanted LYE and Thornton Tomasetti and our building team to be comfortable with it. They said they were, as long as they didn't cover anything up that needed to be addressed with what was identified. So there's limited work going on. So you'll see when you drive through, you used to be an opening. Now there's like, I think like a screen that's kind of sealing it in just so the air conditioning system can be connected. In August, signs were submitted for the additional structural enhancements. And then while that was all going on, submitted a memo to the city commission, and I've done a couple of presentations to the city commission. There was concern that we should probably have an additional firm come on and look at this from the perspective of another peer. So we started reaching out to other firms.
May I ask why?
Sorry.
Why the second period? What's wrong with
There is, I don't think that there was anything necessarily wrong for peer review. I think that there was a lot of concern with what we've seen in the news over the years, that having another set of eyes, and it's not only the reflection areas, it's this until the second. This was only past the reflection area. So the idea was to have another peer review come in and look at this, and then also vet the rest of the.
much bigger scope?
So it's gonna be phased, and I'll talk about that. Anyway, one of the things we were challenged with doing, and one of the concerns was brought up is an engineering firm that doesn't have some sort of relationship with me. That proved to be almost impossible. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a large complicated project. They're a national firm, kind of an international firm, and the companies that we talked to who felt had the right expertise had all done work in the past, not current. So we interviewed 4 firms: UCI Engineering, and Bliss Nitrating. And so also in August, Building Services started design for the additional enhancements. So basically, for the peer review portion, our second requirement, we chose WJE. You can see here some of their background. They were founded 65 years ago. They're an international firm. They specialize in investigation, analysis, testing, design, and structural repairs. So they did Champlain Towers. They did Washington Monument. They did several things we felt were really relevant. We also had police heavily involved in these interviews. The police chief was very comfortable with them, so we felt like just to get the police department a sense of comfort level, this is the way we want to get. Basically, they want to do a phased approach, which we think is appropriate because we need to focus on the deflection areas. We keep that work moving as reasonably quick as possible. So that is going to take approximately 4 weeks. When that is done, then they will move on to phase 2, which will be a peer review of the remainder of the building, looking at the design and making sure that they are paper issues. I think it's important to note that we have not identified any issues elsewhere in the building. There's been some natural things that happen. Here is cracks. Boston Associates has gone through our staff and in just to give a certainty that this is just to kind of give you an idea of the reputation of the building and part of the peer review. So north is at the top, that's Broward. So that area is the general location of where deflection is occurring. So if you see that horizontal golden bar, there are cracks that formed along that support structure on the roof. So when you go on the roof, you see these very cracks that run just along where that support beam is. They're very small cracks. They are indeed there. You can identify them as like that. Are under. So again, what they're going to do is just the area in the first 4 weeks of the deflection, and then go on to the rest of the building. So give you an idea of what we're talking about here. So this is a cross section. I get to this. So this is a cross section of the building. So if you're looking at this building through it, you're actually looking at an east-west orientation, right? So Broward would be on the right side of the street. So this next image, if you look at just this red column here from the honchos, that was the original structural enhancement that was designed by Thornton Thomason. The idea there is that it would decrease the distance where the support was happening from this point to that. One thing that's very interesting to me, like I said, I'm not an engineer or architect, but it is not connected to the floor here. It is structurally connected to that beam so that all the load is transferred down through the beam. However, that fix by itself did not stop the deflection. These panels here are really part of what the culvert is. The slab itself was under-designed. What happened was, there used to be a zigzag steel girder down here, and that's what supported, that was what was gonna support the panel. That was removed a while ago under a value engineering exercise. It's expensive, it's cheaper, but they didn't account for the additional weight, because these were precast concrete panels. That weight just got onto the construction.
That's what I'll talk about value engineering later.
So obviously, flex is still occurring, we didn't like that, we don't wanna see that happen. So what is being proposed in addition to this, and by the way, there was some additional foundation work, but only on 2 of the columns. I'll show you that in another image.
Again, just like you, I'm not an engineer. I appreciate the fact that the grid column doesn't impact the third floor slab. It's only attached to the column.
Yeah.
What's the in of
I'll get to that in just a second. Yeah. So original enhancement here, additional foundation work here. This is more than was originally done, so this kind of shows everything that's anticipated to come to home. The question you're asking. That beam zigzag like this was supported with the roof slab. This was always designed to support them. The engineers and Galactus, this has got more than enough capacity to support weight above it. So this is not an issue. They want this additional structural here, tie that in to the roof that will support it from above, called an upturn beam. Do an additional jacket down here to support additional weight. And then do additional foundation work here in 4 locations, not just the original 2, micro piles and some other foundation. I think this would probably show a little bit better, to get a better idea of where it is. So originally, we only had the 2 beams, the 2 additional notches, and then additional foundation here and here. New work is going to be the upturn beams in these locations, the additional jackets down here to support those beams, additional foundation work. Right now it's anticipated to go about 9 feet to the ground.
columns from
We are told these columns are total fine. They have more than enough capacity.
Red is 2 additional columns on that. Second order.
This is the first floor. Second floor, third floor. So the original fix, those are already there.
Those are the original.
Those are the
they
original.
weren't in the original
They
design.
weren't in the original design.
So where were the columns? Where was the roof supported from?
So the original design was just this. This would have been fine if they had calculated the weight for the concrete capacity. It was all supported just in that. That's,
There were columns at that level.
yeah,
Now
there's,
you've
there's,
added
there's
to the
column.
number.
Exactly.
No, the
We increased the
receiving
width.
of the existing.
Oh,
column.
you've increased
So if
the
you see
width.
here, the distance from there to there was that. They tried to shorten the distance. To make it support itself.
Just a question. Deflection has already occurred,
The deflection has stopped because of the shoring.
but there is deflection.
There is
There's
deflection,
a number X, okay?
Yeah.
We're not jacking it up.
No.
No, we're just preventing any additional flexing and resizing the windows.
So now you're showing, you haven't got additional parts in there as well. It's the three, each of those
So
foundations.
These micropipes don't exist now.
You can do that as well.
That's the current
I would have
recommendation.
thought that the ground level, that was affecting the roof, you would have seen some there as well.
Right, so here's what they told me, yeah, and I'm the expert here, and we can circle back around if you want some more technical presentation, we can definitely set that up, but here's what I was told. The calculation for this was wrong, positive deflection. Calculation for this was also wrong. Although the the foundation still performing within specifications they needed to. They didn't see any movement of the foundation at all, but they did identify that there was a shortcoming in that calculation as well, which is why they're gonna go in and add additional foundation work and add the micropiles.
All four of them.
So all four of them. So right now, remember the only fix that we did originally were these two columns and those two foundation areas. These additional micropiles and these foundation and these additional micropiles, those, and then all four of these are part of the new fix.
And this red fix is proposed by who?
So it was a joint proposal by LYE, third party engineer, and the engineer of record, which is Thompson.
I pretty much reacted to the Sun Sentinel article that was written back in, whatever it was. And they had photographs in there. But just looking at it, and I realized I could not make I'm a retarded civil engineer. I know I couldn't make any distinction on what really transpired, because you have to really be on the site. You have to conduct certain tests, find out if concrete is constructed to be in compression to maintain its strength. And if something happens prematurely, where it achieves that, and it loses that and goes in towards an intention, falls apart. So I'm hoping that's not what happened. It sounds like it was somebody that forgot to include live dead loads on that structure. And that exceeded it. If it cracked anything like that, it exceeded that. A lot of times what they'll do is with the reinforced steel, they'll put that in tension, pour the concrete. I sent a memo to the mayor and the commissioners, public works. Pretty careful stating that I really couldn't examine or find what really happened, because you have to, like I said before, gotta be out on the site, you gotta this, you know, look at it and see if in fact the concrete lost its compression and started cracking. And the photo in that newspaper, they had a longitudinal crack. That's a classic of the concrete being turned, not curing completely, and it withstood the live dead loads, causing it to fail. And then the steel that's usually in there that creates strength, that's supposed to be released after the concrete has cured, so it creates more of a safety compression condition. And again, my question would be, did the concrete cure over the specified time, and were there tests to confirm same?
It's my understanding that it did. I'd have to have someone pull the reports to take a look at it, but that it had, and they expected it to perform differently. I think from the way it's been described and explained, and Northern Thomas City has admitted that they made a calculation error. They just didn't calculate the dead load of the concrete. Correct.
Okay, let's, first, Gregory.
I was gonna say, has this solution been accepted or approved and accepted by the city?
So the portion, there's permits that have been issued only for the upturned beams at this point, so what you see on the roof. The additional work is being tied together with the foundation, and there's some additional calculations that Lycus and LYE and Northern Thomas City are working on. So they may have submitted it to the city as of last week around Thursday. They hadn't yet.
I'm a retired project manager, so time and money. How much time have we lost associated with it?
So right now, associated with this, we haven't really lost any, but we are in danger of losing time. We do have stipulated language in our contract that deals with this kind of stuff. So AECOM is well aware that we're doing the review review. Moss is well aware of it as well. We're doing what we can to keep moving forward. But I mean, the reality is we may have to stop work at some point to allow this to occur so that we can then pick it up and move forward. And there's other things they can do on the site. But, you know, in this area, it's a little limited until we're going.
Peter,
Is there a threshold inspector in this job and who's paying for the second year review?
So AECOM is gonna pay for all the peer reviews. So they've already agreed to that. They've said that on the record. In terms of the threshold, you're talking like CEI.
It's my understanding that buildings, you know, certain size and value has to have a threshold inspector.
Yeah, no, we do have threshold inspections, but if you're talking about CEI, we didn't really do that in a traditional way. We have AECOM performing those services for us. And that's just how the contract was.
So, I mean, okay.
yes, Mike.
So as a city, are we gonna be at any kind of financial detriment or loss?
It is not our intent to be out of any kind of financial. It's,
Okay.
How you
Well,
gonna,
let me,
sorry,
how you gonna get out of it?
it's written into the contract. There's an errors and omissions section of the contract. So they have to meet the requirements of the contract. So these were design flaws. This was clear an error and omission, and they've admitted that on the record. So right now, we're working with our city attorney's office as well as our risk department. We're about to draft up another letter to them, just stipulating that here's where we are with this. We just want to keep the communication going so that they know clearly what our stance is. They've agreed to it. They're fine.
So I presume that the city was not a consultant that was doing the construction management. And then when this happened, the construction manager out there to look at the different phases of construction.
Yes, I'm not sure I understand the
Well,
question.
I presume, I don't want to presume,
That's not-
who was the construction manager that had the responsibility of looking at what the contractor was doing and making sure that it was in confines of construction standards and
So we have a project manager for the city side. His name's David Byrne. He used to work in I think, has experience with larger projects. And then we have Bob Buscemi, who's on our team. But I do wanna stipulate though, that AECOM and Thornton Thomas City's design was followed. Moss built what they were told to build. It was just deficient.
the design engineer basically caused the problem. Since of under designing or didn't take into account the cantilever, extra weight that was on the cantilever.
Right. So when that change happened to the material, that just was not properly addressed on the engineering design side.
So our building manager, our construction manager, our project representative, okay? He or she did not find the problem, somebody
No,
else found the
It
problem.
wasn't identified until the glazing.
Which was why I asked about the threshold.
Right, but there was a crack there before the glazing was
So-
probably occurred, and nobody went up on the roof and saw a crack.
No, people did get up on the roof, and so that's why I stipulated earlier that when concrete does cure, it does develop cracks. I think, and I wasn't there for this part of it, so I'm going on what I've been told and what it sounds like happened. Cracks did form on the roof, but cracks were forming everywhere through a natural kind of occurrence. It wasn't until the deflection was identified that they went up and started looking at it more closely. What was going on the roof was all the, well, I don't even know how to really describe it, Peter, you might want to help me, but when the roof slab was poured and everything was done, then the subcontractor came up there to put on the actual roofing system, which is like a 4-part system.
I love it.
And so it was meant to seal it all up. They were working from one side of the building to the other. They stopped here because once we identified, we said, you can't cover this up, we gotta fix it, and so it's,
But if you hadn't found that problem, they would have just kept going.
yeah, they would have kept going.
So we got lucky in a
Don't
sense.
forget, this is a design build project, basically. This is a design build project,
Right.
and basically, the city is hands off on this. Is the way it is.
Well, that's why I wanna talk about value engineering and all these other things, because we're about to embark on a city hall. We don't wanna, what lessons have we learned here?
Well, and it's a good conversation to have. I would never say don't talk about that because I'm not. But I mean, you do have cost constraints, you have materials that are hard to get. One of the things that Moss really helped us with is their relationships with vendors and suppliers. It's really helpful in keeping this project moving because there was no concrete. they basically talk to companies. So when you talk about value engineering, it can mean a lot of things, right? Sometimes it's just the material that you're wanting to buy is available, the quantities that you need it, so you move to something else to try and keep the project going. So I totally hear what you're saying. This was, from what I understand, cost related. That wasn't part of those discussions, but the steel was much more expensive, so it was able to save some.
But we didn't lose the steel because we couldn't get the steel.
No,
We
not
lost
that
the
point.
steel because it was cheaper to go concrete. Well, that's what I'm saying.
And I guess the strength of the concrete, strength of steel, diameter, thickness, how much steel is going out there to achieve this, take care of the dead and live loads. I guess it comes down to designer really. If in fact, if it was designed properly, so it could stand, meet, and dead and live loads. That'd be interesting. I put that in my, I didn't have any evidence or any information because even if I did a walk, I'd have to try to test it. The X-ray to see if the steel has disengaged.
And they've done all that, by the way,
Okay.
just so you're aware.
Okay.
They have X-rayed the slabs, they marked where all the rebar is. They've, at this point, as far as the work related to what's on the roof, at this point, all the cracks have been treated. So basically what they do is they kind of clean them up and then they paint epoxy that's like pressurized into the crack.
And one thing that goes back years, first got on to the construction task force, I was with the, I'll mention any names, Public Works Director. Went up and we were going to an awards thing and went to the jet stop parking facility south here. And then driving up to the parking. And then I noticed on the way up, there was half-inch cracks, ramps. Please. That supporter gets in. Changes, loses the pressure.
These cracks were very, I mean, images on it, tell very, very
Doesn't-
Yeah,
so you feel them, you can see them there. So what they do is they kind of widen this to the pressure, put it under pressure. So that, another thing to remember is, it's like I said, roofing, the roofing system stops right about here. When this is all done, once that all that work is done, all the subterraneans will be covered by that same system. You won't even see it. So it'll all be sealed in and be, hopefully protected 100% from it.
I'll shut up. I'm like a mother. goose
Yeah,
trying
I
to-
hear you. And last time I was on the roof, this was just last week, they had all those locations marked where they put in the additional structure.
Okay, so I wanna talk a little bit about the procurement of this project. There was a design built. So the city signed the contract with Moss.
Signed a contract with AECom for the design.
Okay, so the city signed a contract with AECom. AECom was responsible for design. It was not, that task was not completed correctly. Because there was a failure on the design. Design, been built,
It was designed by AECom and then we contracted separately with Moss for the construction.
Oh. so the Moss, what I understand, the Moss built as a design for the AECom. And AECom signed the contract with the city.
Yeah, they do not have a contract with each other. It's all, we are the connecting point for third world.
So in other words, Moss did not select AECom as a design.
It was like,
So what would you say this is kind of, given our discussion about the city hall and the methodologies of procuring building of the city hall, is this design build something? It doesn't seem like design build.
this is a design build. It's
It's
designed by.
We contracted for a design, and we contracted separately for a contractor. That does not sound like design build.
So it's not design build, but it's not also bid. So how that was awarded to us without a bid?
It was through an RFP. So we submitted an RFP, they responded. and
So
then
there was
we entered into
RFP based on
contract.
the qualification? Based price, how?
I have to go back and look. That process started before I came on the project, so I don't have a lot of institutional knowledge on it, but I can find out. for you.
Because that's my second question, but we already, seems like the additional design or the review, the peer review. Be be covered already by A, right? So
Yeah,
it's
they've
like
agreed.
that's covered, but
I agreed.
who would cover the additional cost of the quote?
So we're breaking it up into two things. So what we did was we went through a couple of exercises in that those slides I had and all the months on there. So that's just a very tip of the iceberg overview. There were several meetings that have been had between our team, AECom, Fort Tomasetti, and Moss to go through each line item so that we can identify which line items are attached to this issue and then keep that under a separate bucket so that we can go easily into that errors and omissions section of the AECom contract and have us deal with it through that. So it's basically an insurance claim. Is basically what it is. And so we need to be able to identify what is linked to this particular issue so that we can make that claim. So that's what we're trying to keep that paperwork separate, because we still have other things that are going on, right? You know, change notices. SPOs, change orders, yeah. So we're trying to bifurcate the two so we can get an AECom. We've talked to them, we've had a legal department talk to them and discuss them with us. This is the only way we have to deal with it because we are. So we got to follow the rails.
Okay, Roosevelt, and then we'll go around to other new questions. Rest.
If we're gonna put the roof.
Wait.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
We'll go around.
The big parties on this bridge. You said somebody else is taking all the blame. The lead, the beam and all of this. If we have one contract with another contract for builders, how do you stop things?
There has been no finger pointing. AECom has admitted they made a mistake. There's no finger pointing.
That's up to now.
Yeah, it's the only issue we've
Have,
identified.
the contractual price changed?
No.
Have the city made any requested change?
Yeah, we've made requested change orders, but most of them were attached to the building department review. So for instance, there was a coating that I guess, at some point, there was a discussion to remove this coating from the top deck of the parking garage as an example. To save some money. It turns out that that coating is required by the Florida Building Code, so we had to put it back in. So stuff like that. There was a removal of the skylight. We put that back in. So those were all changes.
And we pay for those.
Yeah, the
Because
ones
they're
that we
ours.
asked for, yeah,
Yeah,
they're ours.
they're ours.
When they're ours. Anything, just to be clear, anything associated with an error in emission, we're not paying for that under our
But
typical
anything that
process
we
that has to go
request in
through.
addition to. See, that's where I wanna get. I wanna know what were the contractual price to do this project? And then how much have been added to that? through
Nothing-
change orders?
Nothing's been added yet. It's a GMP. So we're right now we've utilized money from some of our contingency on the city side and the contingency on the construction side. We haven't added anything to the cost.
We haven't gone over the contingency yet. Someday we will go over the contingency and be concerned, but not yet. We have enough to be concerned about. All right, James.
Anthony, just to be clear, so AECom, they're the design people, but the actual engineering was done by Tomasetti.
Yeah, as a sub to AECom.
So, and they contracted with Tomasetti to do the engineering.
Correct.
Do the drawings, develop this, and there was the error that was not taken into account with the addition.
Which is ultimately why it's AECom's responsibility.
Because the subcontractors to them. So the relationship between the city, Thomas said it does not exist.
Other
It's
than through
only
the
through
contract
AECom.
as a sub, yeah.
All right, trying to make sure I understood.
Yep.
Okay.
Just to comment, if you're gonna put all the roof layer, like you said, those additional roofing coverings on, see if they can build in an inspection port where you saw the biggest crack. If you have deflection in the future, you'll have a port rather than have to tear off all that off, you just have a port.
That's an interesting idea. I'll float that by them, see if that's an option for that roofing system. I don't know enough about it. I would mention this too. AECom has offered to basically monitor that area for a period of time as stipulated in the American Concrete Institute's ACI, I think, the American Concrete Institute manual. So basically, and I had to get a lesson on this, when concrete cures, it's going to move. It just is going to move. Well, the question is, does it move outside of the safe parameters in the ACI manual? And the answer in this situation is it didn't. It's unfortunate that it moved at all because we couldn't fit the glazing and it did identify an issue that we needed to address. But they have told me, and LYE has backed this up, that it is still within the limitations of the ACI manual specifications. It just closed the gap too far to fit in the glazing, but I'll mention the port. But they were gonna monitor for 57 months. And the reason it's 57 is because they're going from the start of the cure date of the slab. So it's a total of 60 months per ACI, and so they agreed to monitor for that period of time. We're trying to work out what happens if we do detect any additional movement and how we're going to address it. They've kind of given us some initial feedback on how they'd like to address it. Our city attorney's office and myself are not comfortable with that response, so we're still developing that conversation as well.
Okay, Peter, no, I'm sorry, Jerry, you haven't come back to Peter.
Thanks for the explanation. From the onset of this discussion, value engineering has taken a lot of shots. Who selected the gang that did the value engineering? Because as far as I could see, there's been two major mistakes made. And that is the load on that cantilever piece.
Yep.
And nobody said, wait a minute, you can take a truss off a building and nothing's gonna happen. I mean, who did the diligence to select who did the value engineering? Who did it, by the way?
Who did the value engineering?
Yeah.
Well, it would have been AECom. I mean, I
Well,
wasn't.
no, because they didn't do the engineering.
Well, but Thornton Tomasetti did, the engineer of record who was a sub to AECom.
They signing and sealing the drawings.
There's a conflict of interest that I'm hammering on here. That is, the first attribute of a good value engineering team is that they're divorced from the process.
Mhm.
Or they're coming in to take a look at it, not as a peer review, as a, is this okay? First thing that should have been done is, are the loads right?
Of course, yes. I would totally.
Swing and a miss. I mean, you got the Leaning Tower of Pisa here, Alan. And I don't think this was gonna be a tourist attraction 100 years from now. It's for AECom, they're doing what they're doing, they're gonna be embarrassed.
I'll give AECom this, they have not backed down from saying that they made a mistake and that it's their responsibility. As far as the value engineering aspect of it, I don't really have an answer for you. The
Because
team-
therein lies the answer to Marilyn's
Right.
question.
The team that was involved in those conversations are effectively not here anymore.
Well, but okay, you always blame it on the guy who wasn't here anymore, you know, that's typical.
Human nature.
I did this when I was you, okay? I didn't do it. The guy, he retired, he went to California, it wasn't my fault. That's not the answer.
No,
Was
I'm
that-
not trying to
no,
give that
not
as the
you.
answer.
No,
What I'm
no,
trying
no.
to say is that
No, but
knowledge.
that's not the answer for us, okay?
Okay.
The question for us is, who decided to do value engineering? We entered into a contract with ACAM for a particular building designed a particular way. We paid a price for that building. Who then decided, you know what? That's still the price, but we're gonna change the design and do it a different way, and maybe we'll save some money. ACAM saved the money, not us. We paid the
No,
price.
AECom, no. AECom didn't save any money.
Who benefited from the value engineering?
The city was supposed to benefit from that.
Well, how did we benefit from the?
Because the cost was in the materials. AECom's not paying for that. They're just paying for a design. We still had to pay Moss to construct, and that means they have to procure the materials. So the cost differential between the steel and the concrete is where the savings was supposed to occur. Don't forget, when this all started, we didn't own that parcel that's over to the east. There was no COVID. There hadn't been inflation. The cost of everything escalated so high.
I got that, I got that.
But it
Let's
was
go back.
supposed to benefit us.
Let's go, it was supposed to benefit
Yeah.
us, so we decided that we would save the money from going from steel to concrete.
As
Because
I-
you told me it wasn't a question of there was no steel, it was cheaper to do it in concrete,
Yes, that's what I said.
so we
Yes.
made the error. We will not make
No, no,
that
no,
error
no,
again.
no, 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 no.
No, I didn't say we made an error, I take it back, we did not make an error. Okay. We made a decision.
Yes.
We made a decision to change the design, to save some money. And to me, that was a problem.
But surely we didn't make the client, didn't make that decision. The client said, this is too much money. Can you make it less expensive? And that-
It's my understanding, the way the conversation went was this cost is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Remember, it was originally supposed to be under $90 million, it was like
Right.
$88 million. And then we had 100 million and then it jumped to 104 million. It's my understanding that the question was posed, can we save some money on this project? And then the response was, here's a list of things you can do to save that money. Which ones do you want to pick? And that was pointed out as an easy one to do because like I said, the columns on the one level were designed already to support the load of the change. And then you weren't gonna see those steel girders anyway, they were hidden behind the glazing. So I think from a design aspect, aesthetically looking at it, it wasn't causing a lot of changes. There were additional columns that were added.
We would have assumed that any of the alternatives we were being presented were just as safe. as the original.
Okay, Mark, so
I
you
was
were
gonna
asking.
tag on to that. Whenever you go through a value engineering exercise, the design team is involved. They sign off on whether or not removing that aspect is going to be okay. So it was an
ACAM had
ACOM.
to sign off.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
That-
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what
and
makes
there's
it a
no-
problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
but we decided to try and
we asked for,
we asked for ways to get the project costs down.
which happens on
That's not
every
bad.
project.
Yeah, every-
It happens on every project.
Martin, yes, and just to piggyback on that, so like you mentioned, there was a list that was provided to the city, what it saves, what would save potentially a money, right? But I think the responsibility still should be on the engineers and the contractor himself. Because they can probably put on the list, don't put the roof, don't put the windows, we're gonna save a lot of money on the glass. Is that the reasonable recommendation? I think no. So I think that list should be already approved by the engineers, by the designers, and just the items that, the way how we can save the money. Because city doesn't have that expertise, so that's why it's engaging the engineers and trust that engineering opinion, and they don't have that expertise. So if you're giving them the list of the items and the amount, how much they can potentially save, the understanding is those items it's safe to remove and not to leave them. So I think that was the mistake, whoever made that list.
There's always a lot of mistakes that go around.
GC makes the list,
That's
the engineer signs
So-
off. The engineer.
My
That's.
initials,
It's the-
the bigger. Is that. It looked like threshold. Threshold. Is they are usually an experienced structural engineer. They're watching this on a daily basis. They might have actually pulled in for this point when I've heard it's the one lesson that the bigger lessons as well, but that's one thing that we.
I absolutely agree with you. We've been discussing internally how to ensure, those boxes are ticked on future projects, so there's no situation. We're also talking about bringing in CE9 services through a third party, trying to go through that process. There's gonna be costs associated with that, we're gonna bear that cost because that's not part of the contract. But I think it'd be a good idea to do it. You hit the nail on the head. I don't think that a CEI or threshold inspection or anybody would have seen this, because what they would have done was looked at the plans and said, hey, Moss, did you build it per the specifications in the plan? Since this was purely a calculation error, the plans would have showed that, yeah, this is what you're supposed to do, you go do it, they did it.
Yeah, Lars is off the wall. Lars is off. Okay. Any other questions on this item? Vis-a-vis the substance of this item and not necessarily vis-a-vis lessons we learned going forward.
Chair Mas. I understand Mas provide the list as a contractor, how did the city take the money?
No, Moss didn't provide that list.
Side?
Moss did not provide that list. This was all still in design.
Okay.
That change
They will
happened
find
during the
design of
design.
the A.
Yeah, this didn't change after, no, that changed the plans that happened prior to groundbreaking. Moss wasn't even in the picture yet. We were still negotiating their contract. This is all in the design side.
So ACAM made the things. ACAM gave you a list of how I make this cheaper.
That's how I understand it.
And that's why ACAM is on the hook, because they suggested to go with this system. And they didn't calculate the way.
It's all about calculation.
It's all about-
Yeah, that, it appears that that change of material just was not properly accounted for in the foundation or the roof.
Great, we good? Yes, oh, one more, who's that?
No. And I make it very important. And how.
But it's on Peters.
And
yeah.
so there's.
I'm parliamentarian, I love it. Okay, very good, all right. So, no, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
About to move on to the next item on our agenda. City Hall update.
I can hear you. How are you? Laura Reese, I met with all of you and we helped you with the Reimagine City Hall effort. At this point in the process, my colleague Ben is going to be taking over the City Hall next steps forward as we plan to move forward. But if you have any questions about the past work we've done or anything related to public outreach, I'll be here in the back row.
Okay,
So.
Hi, Ben.
Good afternoon, for everyone who I don't know, my name is Ben Rogers, acting as city manager. In my real job, I was the transportation director. As Laura indicated, I'm taking over kind of the project at this point and we'll move to the next phases. We gave the city commission an update at the end of August, so I have that here as our kind of our guideline today to talk about where we're at next steps. So as we talked to, wait for that, you know, you can see right now what City Hall looks like. They're in the demo stages now. It should be done sometime all the way down, sometime before the end of the year. We're looking between Halloween and New Year's Eve for that to be completely demolished. Once it's demolished, it will be seeded, so it'll be grass, it'll be construction fenced off, and we'll remain in that state. We go to the next steps of City Hall. So again, this is the presentation that we did on August 20th for the City Commission. We started off and we highlighted just some of the things that we've done to date, right? We had Laura's team led all the public workshops. I think there's 5 or 6 of them all together, different topics, subjects.
We were there, Ben.
Yep, information task force was there, EOI, and then the commission discussions of what they envision. Our current efforts, as I talked about, is the demo of City Hall. We started outreach to other municipalities that are either in the process of building a City Hall right now or recently completed one. In this area, we talked to the town of Davie, who's in that process now. We talked to the city of Clearwater, who's again in that process now. And then we have a couple more calls that we're in the process of scheduling. Most of those calls are focused on lessons learned. What would you change? What have you done different? Where did you get stuck? And really, everyone that we've talked to has had kind of a different, unique lens on it based off of their circumstances with their structure. But one of the biggest things was make sure before you get this thing going 100 miles an hour, that you get your foundation set. If you're bringing an owner's rep on, bring them on ahead of time so they can help guide you through some of the initial stages. And that way you're walking lockstep throughout the entire process. We're looking at procurement strategies and processes, initial space planning for those who were around.
with the joint government center that we contemplated with the county. We did a lot of planning in that, so we're dusting that off, trying to figure out what that looks and feels like now, especially post-COVID with remote work. Does that mean we have more hotel space? Does that mean we just have more conference room space? And taking those into consideration. We're not getting too far down in the weeds on that at this point, because we are gonna be bringing on an owner's rep, and one of our goals is to bring on an owner's rep that has a specialty in city halls and municipality buildings, and help them guide us through some of these things, you know. Let the experts lead us through the things that we may not know. And then there's some funding planning going on and some initial seed money so we can move forward with design. At this point right now, there's no site selection that has been determined. There's not a size of the building. There's not any physical decisions made on that. That's something that will go back to the city commission to give us that direction on. But what we are working on is onboarding an owner's representative, and then we'll be moving on to a design criteria package. So owner's representative, we've found about 5 or 6 RFQs for city halls that were recently done. We've also looked at some local RFQs that were put out, like the Broward County Convention Center. And we're comparing and contrasting what all those documents had in it to make sure that when we build ours, we have the core fundamentals that everyone did. And then we're trying to find you know, what makes the most sense for us. So again, we've got a handful of RFQs and just really looking at the scope of services and how we want to put that document together. Design criteria package is required by Florida statute if we're going to do design build. We haven't made that decision on what the project delivery will be at this point, but we are going to start the process. Our procurement process will take us a number of months to onboard someone to do this. And so if you look at the next slide here, we've got 2 timelines. On the left in the dark blue is the owner's rep timeline. And then on the right in the light blue is the design criteria package timeline. You can see there's about 3 or 4 months between the two. And the reason is that we can onboard that owner's rep to help us select the firm that would be awarded the design criteria package. And that's really where we're at right now. So any questions, Madam Chair?
I've seen this slide once before, Ben, and I got confused. In the design criteria package, scope definition, winter of 2025, is that?
That's probably like January.
December?
That's probably January.
January 2025.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then.
This should follow this by about 3 or 4 months.
Okay, so because when I saw that the first time, I thought, well, that's not till December of 2025, and it didn't make sense because you had summer.
Yep.
I was very confused by it, but you're talking January
Yes.
2025.
January, February. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Our recommendation to the commission was that there should be a rigorous site selection process. I'm not seeing site selection. I'm seeing full speed ahead with a particular project. So where in this, let's say we're within the owner's representative timeline, are we going to have an opportunity to have somebody sit down and say, we looked at this possibility, that possibility, this possibility, and we are recommending the commission, well, not recommending, we're just saying, these are your options, commission make a decision. I'm not seeing that anymore.
Yeah, so part of the owner's rep scope will have site selection requirements in it. So we'll put that as an option, with bill hours associated with it, but if the commission would direct us or give us direction before that period, then obviously we wouldn't need that optional service, but it will be included in the owner's rep.
So have you put together the owner's representative scope yet?
No. No, that's
So,
what
but
we're at.
somewhere in that scope.
Somewhere in that scope, there will be an option for site selection. And again, if you look at this timeline, it's not until spring. So if the commission would give us direction of saying, use the existing site before then, we wouldn't need the owner's rep to have and facilitate those conversations. But if that direction is not provided before we onboard the owner's rep, then we'll have them deliver whatever needs to be delivered.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
James.
Yeah, second question. The owner's rep, I'm make sure I understand, is that like you hire a consulting company or you hire an engineering firm or what? Help me understand what an owner's rep is.
Yeah, so it's almost a blend of both of that, right? It's usually a consulting firm that also has construction engineering experience, licensed construction manager, and they are gonna be kind of like the subject matter expert for us. So they're the ones that are gonna hold the AECOM or the MOS, through the process. So as we walk through the path together, we have our own subject matter expert who's done this type of project before, who can say yes, no, maybe so.
So a company like AECom, could they be an owner's rep?
I believe they do have an owner's rep wing, but I'm not 100% sure.
Think project director. Think project director,
Project, I think they're a little more than a project.
maybe, yeah, but
Our owner's representative on the water treatment plant is Hazen and Sawyer.
correct.
So think Hazen and Sawyer, they could bid on this and be our owner's rep. And their job is to keep,
That's a big jump.
that's a big
Yeah,
job.
it's a big job, and one of the things that we'll do in the RFQ, and that's what we're trying to make sure we get it right, is that we're taking the time to build out that expertise level that we want and the familiarity with municipal projects, understanding city halls, the way they work. So that way they can help us with space planning, they can help us with the building, and walk us through the whole process.
Michael, is your hand up or you're just
Yeah,
pointing?
no, well, both. So is the city gonna be hiring staff internally to also work with the owner's rep in a sense to kind of oversee the owner's rep? Is the city planning on making hires to supplement this project in addition to obviously having the owner's rep?
I don't know that answer right now.
Thanks.
But you bring up a good point about hiring city staff. Just to go back to the previous discussion, how many hours of staff time have we had to devote to solving this problem? That's a cost to us. That was work that Anthony couldn't be doing something else. So it's not that this police station thing isn't going to cost us yet. We don't know how that will shake out, but you never know. But we have devoted a tremendous amount of staff time to resolving this issue, so just put that on the table. Great, so I guess I don't have any more questions, as long as the site selection is in there.
Yeah.
I'm good.
I would like to know. There's been a lot of requests about what the city hall should, what city hall should provide. When will we know? Somebody have given a recommendation to the staff, to the commission and say, this is what we suggest as, I know we did our part. But there's still, those final determinations yet to be made.
Right, there's been a lot of input, there hasn't been a lot of, the output decision hasn't been made. I would say probably early 2025 is when you'll probably get some conversations. A lot of these processes, obviously, if you look at the timeline, take time to go through the solicitation process and bid. So this is our priority now of getting something on the street that doesn't have to have specific granular information. And that way we can run its course and then we'll have a second conversation once this is out and working its way on trying to get that direction from the city commission.
So you bring up a good point. I was concerned that the scope have in it the site selection process. Should also in scope have an outreach to the people who participated, saying how this project, as they are proposing it, meets those, it takes into account all the work that all those people put in. Otherwise, we'll have yet another project where people say, we spent, all that time and they didn't do what, they just went off and did what they wanted. So that's two things that should.
And to Jim, to your question earlier about some of the things, I just read a couple bullet points off of what this owner's rep document might include: project scope, objectives, budget, timeline, site information, site selection, design technical specifications, stakeholder information, communications plan, risk management plan, legal and contractual requirements, evaluation criteria, and then construction. So a lot of those things I think we've heard.
Can I also point out that we may not be around to do this, so we may at some point have to talk about talking to the commission, maybe not us, but there should be interaction with whoever the infrastructure committee is as we go through this so that we can maintain that continuity. But that's a whole nother subject. Martha, you had something.
Okay, so in some point in your presentation, you mentioned not selected for building method. But the design criteria package itself, I don't wanna get the board excited, but this is pretty much just saying. We want a 15-story building to fit 700 employees, provide the 5 conference rooms and the chamber. It's very general, so. I see the timeline, so it's gonna be summer 2025, pretty much a year from now. To have something general that's gonna be talking about for a year.
And sorry to cut you off, but to correct you, that is when the consultant will be onboarded and start. Right?
Yes.
So that would even be the finished product of a design
Correct.
package.
And then,
That'd be started.
right, and then we take this criteria package, then we go advertise, and I see it's only 2 methods when you have criteria package, and you kind of said in the previous slide or the next slide that there's design.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's where the criteria. They hire the designers, and then it's gonna be all the details. Very, very long term program. Because you raise yourself, Madam Chair, you may be right, you may not be even here.
It's true, I mean,
But that's the process that has to be done in the city, so I just wanna cautious that. See, all excited about the criteria package, but it's very general and it's not really solid design. It can change during that actual design of houses. Another.
It's the basic 30% foundation, next phase.
yes, Jim.
Thank you, Maura. That's a great setup for me for my next question. I'm gonna direct this to Laura. So we have like beginnings here of a timeline. Just heard Marta talk about, this is gonna be a while. So financing our temporary digs, what's the plan? How are we thinking about that?
So
Are you projecting past what you originally thought it would be at the time in this temporary space?
So our temporary space, including the police headquarters, we talked about is around $5 million a year. Right now, what we're projecting is that until a new city hall opens up, we'll continue paying that. So our balance budget this current year, fiscal year 2025, it includes the rental costs for the spaces we are now. So as we look at how to finance the new city hall, we'll be including, the rental costs coming off at the time that we start the payment for the new. It'll cost more to be in a new city hall than to be rental spaces. So we'll have to add costs and then reduce costs.
But you're really, you're thinking out farther.
Yeah.
I think originally people thought 3 years with maybe a 1 year add to it. It's gonna be.
Yeah, our structurally balanced budget, where ongoing revenues equal ongoing expenses and those costs for the foreseeable future. And at such time, we have good numbers for better numbers for the city hall. We'll update those in our month.
Yes, Mike.
Where in this process does the consideration for a P3 come in? Would a P3 perhaps be a more efficient way of going about this, or is this? I know design build, right, but is that a foregone conclusion, or is that something the owner's rep helps out with, or?
Yeah, I think there's two responses there. When you say P3, it's really just a public-private partnership where we go to bid and we have a solicitation, something like Los Osos Marina, right? That was a P3 where public land, we bid it out, they got it, they paid 50 years to build it. Or if you go with unsolicited proposal route, that's a different story.
Right,
So
right.
I think it really just depends on what happens. As the conversation continues to evolve, there might be interest that sparks in unsolicited, and then that point, it's up to the commission to determine if some of those pros and cons outweigh each other. And if not, then it would go back to this design criteria package.
And I gotta follow on to that, has the city determined what the budget is for this yet? I know there's been a ton of numbers been thrown around that I've heard, but Do we know what we're working with here, or what we're hoping, what we're praying, what we're, like, where are we at? Laura?
What are we
Yeah.
praying for,
Yeah.
Laura?
I'm gonna get the number wrong, but we shared it with you earlier. I wanna say it was, so the amount that was used in the joint complex. It was 150 million, 180 million. I'll get you that number, 180. So what we've been doing is we went down the road with the county for the joint complex and we knew what the city's contribution was going to be at that point. And so we had those in our revenue sufficiency models. And we kept those numbers in our models and we just keep moving them out a little bit farther until we have a good idea of when we'll need to start making the payments. And so what we've anticipated in the revenue models is that it would be a revenue-based bond, meaning that the revenues of the city, not a GO bond, that it wouldn't create its own revenue. So if you went out to the voters and got GO bonds, that would be a better situation for the city because a GO bond creates its own revenue to fund. It's from taxpayers, but it would be new revenue to fund the expense. But in our modeling, we've anticipated that we'll have to dedicate existing revenues towards that absent voter approval.
Whoa, wait a minute. Existing revenues
That's our
dedicated
money.
to the building of the city hall.
Yeah.
Where are we gonna get the existing revenues from?
So an example would be, we get communication service taxes from the state, it's revenues that we're already
I
getting.
know, but
from
we're already
the state.
using those revenues
We
for
are.
something else, so this is very important to me.
Yes.
I mean, the model of revenue bonds is madness. It's madness because we're stretched right now. We can't barely balance the budget right now. You can't be taking revenues out of the budget and dedicating it to this new use without, who's gonna pay for the police and the fire department and the EMS and the roads and the parks? Not gonna work.
That would also be staff's preference it would make our jobs easier if there was a GO bond that was approved. We haven't received that approval and we do need to plan for the future absent. So we'd like to plan for the worst case. And then if, a better situation shows up, but the modeling we showed to the commission in the month of June when we do the joint meeting with the budget advisory board, that always has envisioned it being a revenue.
And you think they understood that?
We tried to.
I know you
Yeah.
did your best, but gentlemen.
I'll answer that question. No chance.
No chance. Okay, gentlemen, and ladies, this is what we do. I mean, it's in our mission to talk about the replacement of infrastructure and funding thereof. It says, and funding, okay? If this is the plan, so at the moment, I think we have an obligation to discuss it amongst ourselves and to come to a conclusion as to whether or not we want to point out in a communication to the commission that the current theory about funding it as a revenue out of existing revenue and consequentially starving revenue from others is not prudent, not prudent.
I agree, it's just a question of when.
Well, as soon as that is
I
no,
think would be.
the
premature to-
plan on the table is to do that. There is a plan, there is a budget. The plan is to they are going to approve that budget on September 16th.
Well, no money would be in place for the funding of no ongoing revenue to support a bond would be in place until such time we design the station. So at this point, we have $10 million in a project account to do this work. And after this work is done, we need to either secure a revenue-backed bond or go up to voters and get approval for a GO bond.
The other thing with a GO is that there's a very good chance that you could get a better credit rating from your credit agencies if if you're not utilizing the underlying credit of the city as it is. And then secondly, I think you can typically get that debt a little bit cheaper than you would in a revenue model as well. Perhaps maybe the coupon payment may be a little lower, but from my experience, typically GOs are obviously a lot more palatable.
So one of the things that we'll do as part of our research is as we're going through each one of these, we'll start looking into the financing side of things and how these other agencies did their funding. Because I do think to your concern, there's a lot of impact. So let us do some homework, and if I need to come back to this committee at the next meeting or 2 meetings from now, maybe I can provide some more.
That would be, I would like to have on the next agenda a discussion of how are we going to fund City Hall? once we get that far down the line. I want the minutes to
We're not-
reflect
I think
that there was concern about the methodology of funding.
I was just gonna say it's too early. I mean, we need to go through
Okay,
some of
it's
these.
premature.
It is premature, but it's not premature to express a concern.
I'm with you.
That's all, we're just expressing a
Yeah.
concern and asking for more information. We're helping them, ladies and gentlemen. We're helping them, trust me in this.
It can be hard to get voter approval for general government facilities, which is one of the reasons we wanna make sure we have a plan.
Right, and that's wise, but also the public has to understand that the consequences of doing it that way means there's no more money for park rangers. I mean, they have to understand, you can't just pull the wool over their eyes. Yes, Peter.
We could, you know, have the presentation that you're asking, and we could just. To the commission, general way, point out. how
I'm all for
stretched
general.
That's specifically saying.
Absolutely. I would never tell them, don't go that route. That's their decision, right? I would simply say, we are concerned which decision you make at this point. If they make that decision, you as the committee, I may not be here, you as the committee may say, no, this is so important that we are gonna recommend that the commission not do that. That's our job. But that would premature. That would way premature. I agree with you. Yeah. Okay? Yes.
So also we have to be careful that if we about to issue the revenue bond, that needs to be a public referendum, and that's all we need during elections. So
They're not gonna do anything in an election. Yeah. They'll never-
Well, but that's another time that we would have to wait for the president to just say yes or no, if the city should take the bond. But just to kind of answer my question before, about the 3P. I think whatever the city is doing right now with the criteria package, that's the step one. And regardless, if the city does not have a money, that's the time when the 3P is coming to the table, because that's the public-private partnership, and they come in with the money. But the criteria package still is very important to have for a city. This way, the private partnership is not gonna do that something, the city hall that has only 2-story, and we need a 5-story, right? So it's kind of like, it's not like we're wasting a time yet, although we don't know how we're gonna fund this project, and maybe we're gonna find out during the criteria package, but whatever the city is doing right now, the criteria package is gonna be important. If we have money, we go with the design build. If we don't have money, we're gonna have to borrow from the private sector and.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, any other questions on this project? No? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks. And then we're quickly moving on to seawalls. Stay quiet, your favorite. Hello, Nancy. Yeah, it's always good to see you.
Seawalls today, City of Fort Lauderdale's tidal barrier ordinance, previously known as the seawall ordinance. It's a tag team. We'll start out, Code will jump in, and then we'll have engineering come in and talk a little bit about what the city's doing related to its own seawalls. So in February of 2023, I did a 1-hour virtual meeting to talk about what's the requirement related to, do I have to raise my seawall? Because there was a lot of misunderstanding about what the ordinance actually was driving. So why did we go down this road? In 2016, we put out a new seawall ordinance and for the first time required a minimum elevation rather than a maximum elevation. And our friends over at Broward County engaged the Army Corps of Engineers to say, given that we're experiencing sea level rise, what's the right height of a seawall built today to deal with the conditions over the next 50 years? And the Army Corps came out and said, it's about 5 feet NAVD, North American Vertical Datum. And just very generically, currently mean sea level rise is very close to NAVD. So Broward County came out and within their planning group, the planning council, they said, it's in the land use plan, every one of the 13 tidally influenced communities must have a tidal barrier ordinance that is consistent with Broward County's ordinance. So that's why the city. This is probably a map graphic you really haven't seen. This is not sea level rise projection based on how much is sea level gonna rise, but it's actually based on NAVD. What's the magic number about how high sea level potentially will get within our community? So in the time frame of a useful sea level, a useful seawall, what we see is by 2070, the likely range of where we're going to see sea level is about 2.5, with the possibility of being as high as 4.6, but that doesn't account for. So that number for 5 feet was based on the likely range plus the impact of these king tides. So the question is, do higher seawalls contribute to community resilience? When we look at, for example, the Isle of Palm seawall, prior to the city elevating the seawall, it was at about 1.2 to 1.5, and it was being overtopped all the time. And this is a single entryway street. If this is flooded, people cannot get to their homes at the end of this aisle. So you can see the difference that time makes in having a seawall that's at 1.2 versus a seawall that's at 5. This particular picture was taken when we had a high tide that was around 2.2, so a fairly extreme high tide for the city, and yet we have a dry road. When you consider what's happened over the course of the last 6 years since the tide gauge went in at Port Everglades, we have a threshold for flooding in terms of NAVD, somewhere around 1.3 feet NAVD. That's the tidal elevation. There's certain streets that start to flood. In 2018, we had 46 of those types of tides. That's not 46 days, that's 46 times a high tide. We have 2 high tides per day, 46 times when the high tide exceeded that threshold. As we get into 2022, 2023, that number is now at 180. So far this year, keeping in mind the king tide season starts next week, we've already had 29 high tides that exceeded that threshold. And that's really about the fact that we're having sea level rise. And so those tides are rising a little bit every year. And we're seeing that we're at that tipping point where we're being impacted more often because the king tides or the regular tides are coming in higher than predicted, and they're starting to come in above that threshold for flooding. So why did we change the ordinance? We had to achieve compliance with what's in our comprehensive plan. There's a specific policy within Broward County's comp plan and their land use code that we had to come into compliance with. We had to adjust our 2016 seawall ordinance to reflect what the commission had adopted in 2020. We had to support reduction of tidal flooding because obviously when we're up to 180 times going over that threshold, there's things we need to do in order to preserve our community. And then obviously to contribute to community resilience. So what were the major changes? The Unified Land Development Regulations, ULDR, didn't know what ULDR stood for. There were several different portions of that code, and then there was a small portion within our existing code of ordinances that needed to be modified, consistent. Basically updating all of the definitions and terms, extending the requirement for not just for seawalls, but all tidal barriers. Anytime you build something between property and the interface with the water, that's now called a tidal barrier. Doesn't have to be a seawall, but a tidal barrier. And that tidal barrier has to meet the requirement of the new code. A minimum elevation of 5 feet for all new or substantially repaired tidal barriers. And then there is some concession that if your structure is permitted before mid-2035, you can build it lower, but it has to be designed so that it can handle the additional load and be raised if it needs to be raised. To my knowledge, very few people are coming in and trying to use this particular provision of the code.
So they're just building it 5 feet.
They're building it or higher.
And they can build high.
They can build them, yep, establishes a maximum, for the most part, 6 feet is really the highest that you can build, so you can build your new seawall 5, 6 feet.
Fine on that.
If you, let me get one more slide or 2 slides down, I will. Requires tidal structures where there's no previous seawall, you have to create habitat enhancement. Because you're essentially taking away a natural shoreline and you're putting in a gray infrastructure or hard infrastructure.
Oh, habitat enhancement. Would you describe that in layman's terms, please?
Habitat enhancement with a new seawall, some people call it a living seawall, but the idea is that the seawall either itself has habitat opportunities where it's not a flat wall, but there's cracks and crannies in it where organisms can come and settle, or there has to be riprap or something like that in front of that seawall where organisms can come in and hide and fish.
So we're supporting natural solutions when a seawall didn't exist. So if we're taking away a natural shoreline,
You have to compensate for that.
compensate
with
for the
new
natural
seawall.
shoreline.
Yep.
I did not know.
And it also encourages the incorporation of living shoreline features in the new seawalls. But the language is encouraged, it's not a mandate.
And is there a definition of living shoreline features?
I'd have to look, I don't remember. The other thing is that there are properties that are below 4 feet of a finished floor elevation. And if you build to 5 feet, that creates problems, and I'll get into that in a second. And so depending on if that property is cited for a low seawall, we don't want them building a seawall that's higher than their finished floor. So the city engineer has the ability to issue a waiver under specific conditions. They could build a slightly lower seawall with that waiver in place.
It's the city.
My understanding is the city engineer is Daniel Ray. Today, yes.
We have a city engineer.
He's on vacation.
Okay, moving along.
Then the final part of this ordinance, again, to be consistent with Broward County's requirement, is that there has to be a real estate disclosure that someone has a tidal barrier on the property and that in the future they may be required to elevate that to meet the current.
Very interesting.
So back to Peter's question, why is there a minimum and a maximum? The minimum elevation is intended to prevent flooding from the sea. The maximum elevation is to prevent flooding from the sky. If you build your seawall or tidal barrier higher than your finished floor, when it rains, the water's going to go toward your house rather than away from your house. And so that's why there's a minimum and a maximum. There was a lot of pressure, both in 2016 and after the new seawall ordinance went in place, where there were individuals that wanted to build their seawalls at 9 feet, 10 feet. And that would have created a situation where we would have been starting to canyonize our canal system. And it also would impact people's views, both staring at that 9-foot wall, but also from the sides. The properties on either side would have impacted their vistas of the water as well. And so that's why there's both a minimum and a maximum. Does that generally answer your question, Peter?
Yeah.
So do I have to raise my seawall? This is really geared toward private property. And so I did a couple of quick calculations. This is by no means an exact number, but there's approximately 18,500 privately owned seawalls in the city. Because we've got over 300 miles of shoreline. So that's a lot of privately owned seawalls, and a substantially smaller portion of that is city owned. So do I have to raise my seawall? According to this tidal barrier ordinance, only if there are 3 conditions. The owner is installing a new seawall or tidal barrier. putting a new one in, you're gonna meet the new requirements. Or if someone comes in for a seawall repair permit and it's determined that more than 50% of seawall has to be repaired. At that point, you're on the chain to build a brand new seawall at the new elevation. If it's less than that and your seawall is at 3.5 feet, fix your seawall, move on into the future. And then the third one is if you're cited. And there's two conditions under which you can be cited. The first one is if your seawall is in disrepair. So it's cracked, it's in danger of falling down. One of the reasons that we have this provision is that in the past, neighbor B was not maintaining their seawall. Neighbor B's seawall falls in to the canal, and it takes neighbor A and neighbor C's seawall with it, because all of these are tied together. And so this one specifically is geared toward, number one, protecting the neighbors from having their seawalls be impacted. And number two, if there is a substantial problem with that seawall, then you've got tidal flows going through the seawall, not over it, but through it. And then the second thing is if an owner is cited, if they're allowing tidal waters to enter their property and either impact their next door neighbors or the city right away. So this is it, 3 conditions. If I have to raise my secret.
How's that last scenario reported?
Reported.
Like, would your neighbors report and say, hey, water's coming through, or?
Neighbors report, neighbors all the time. Code will talk a little bit about what their efforts are. But code enforcement is very active during king tide season to pay attention to water coming onto the roadway. But they also have a boat, so they're looking for seawalls in disrepair as well. Once a street starts flooding, especially these one-way streets, single access streets I was talking about, people are very anxious to let us know that their street's flooding and we need to figure out why. And both code and stormwater operations gets out there to take a look, see if we can find a single property that's causing this. All right, so do I have to raise my seawall? If I currently have a seawall on my property, do I have to raise my seawall? No, only if it meets one of the 3 criteria. If I buy a new house with a seawall, do I have to raise my seawall? No, only if it meets one of the 3 criteria. What we are finding, however, is that when people are buying properties as tear downs, that they are raising the seawall because they're also elevating the property. And it makes it easier for them to elevate the property if the seawall is higher. What if my seawall is low? Do I have to raise my seawall? No, only if it meets one of the 3 criteria. By a specific date, when we originally came out with the 2016 draft proposed ordinance, we said everybody has to raise their seawall by 2035. Small miracle that I survived that original proposal, but the answer is no. Only if you're causing a problem, you have to raise your seawall. If I am cited, do I have to raise my seawall? Not necessarily, but you must put an effective tidal barrier in place in order to address the fact that tidal waters are leaving your property. So you can be creative and find other solutions, not to install a seawall, but you would have to prevent those tidal waters from leaving your property. So for example, someone could put in wing walls and a retaining wall that sits back on their property, and they could retain whatever is closer to the water. And that becomes your new tidal barrier. Move it back, essentially move it back. Or you find, again, you can find other ways to manage putting in a tidal barrier. And if you've ever driven around in the intercoastal area, there's an amazing corner property that has terraced blocks that are cemented in place, and it's beautiful, but it looks natural, but it's a tidal barrier. What if I can't afford a new seawall? City views a seawall citation like any other citation, whether it's you have a problem with your roof, you have garbage in your yard needs to be mowed, you need a new fence, same thing. Property owner has to come into compliance or risk being fined, or the property liens or lack of compliance. because this becomes a community nuisance. If tidal flows are coming over your property, you're impacting your neighbors and your neighbors' ability to access their properties. And the question often comes up, what funding is available for private seawall improvements? There are very few examples of public dollars that are available for private property improvements. Very few examples. We are currently looking into that as part of our Fortify Fort Lauderdale private resilience strategy. But again, those dollars are very hard to come by, very hard to qualify for. And if you're in a situation where you're being cited, that becomes even harder.
What about the state board, which has been providing monies for hurricane hardening? Have you thought about perhaps studying that?
As of right now,
And getting that to see.
so we have looked into whether we can get the property assessed clean energy program to include that. We've looked at whether hurricane mitigation dollars can be used. But again, public dollars spent on private improvements is really hard.
Let her finish or you wanna start it? Go for it.
Fine.
This is just for you.
Already.
Roosevelt. This is just for you.
I understand that, and your presentation was such a beautiful thing until you got to what if I can't afford? That's a problem. And not that I have a seawall, but I know the stress that's under. And when I think of this, when you say there's a little bit of money, possibly that can go after to get some type of assistance. But I go back to what we did with sewer money, when people didn't have money to put their sewer line, hook up their sewer line. The city and the county had I mentioned loans, where you could go ahead and hook up anywhere and they would take so much money to add to light bill or whatever they had coming. Why can't we do this?
At this point, and again, Code's gonna talk about the number of folks they've cited. At this point, we've had very few situations where people were protesting on the basis of so far.
And now we are talking about way out there, 2030. Not gonna have to because I'm not gonna worry about it right now. But we are talking about the increase in sea rise and additional storms that are strong. We need to prepare now what we will have in 2028 or 2030. But I want us to do so.
I think in the context of your previous conversation about where are we gonna get the money for these things, seawalls are a generally funded piece of infrastructure. And there is, and prayers will talk about this, there's barely enough money for us to fix the city-owned seawalls, let alone look at the 18,500 privately owned seawalls to be able to provide the kind of funding that we needed to support private improvements. And I think one of the things that's, I'm gonna use the word elegant about this ordinance is that you don't get cited unless you're causing a problem. And that as sea level continues to rise, that allows the next community and the next community to start to deal with and adapt to that problem when it starts hitting them. And you're absolutely right, you have to plan for the future. Which is one of the reasons why over the course of the next year, we're gonna be looking at opportunities for improving private resilience. Now, Miami Beach has a small program where they will help fund, seawalls are included in that, as I recall.
Yeah, but very, very few are actually, they can afford to do each year.
Yeah, so I mean, there's funding programs, and again, they do not pay for the whole thing, they pay for some portion. But much like solar panels, most people can't afford the upfront costs. even if they can get a 20% rebate back from that cost.
But you definitely stress by not requiring everybody
Right.
to have their seawater at a certain level by whatever year.
Right.
That we, but
I think one of the other things that's important to recognize is that our more challenged, economically challenged communities tend to be further to the west.
I agree.
That doesn't mean they're not tidally influenced, but the other thing that you have to remember about when you're further west, your tidal excursion is much more narrow. So if you live right on the beach, you're seeing 3 feet of tidal range. You live way up near the swap shop, you're probably seeing 6 to 12 inches of tidal range. And so it's not that it's not shifting up too, but it's not shifting in the same way that other places are shifting. So I understand your
I
point, and
appreciate your effort.
we've been
I
thinking
really do.
about how to try to address that issue, but like I said, with over 18,000 private seawalls, it's very hard for us to consider how the city would pay for that.
I think it was like either 13 or 16 properties were getting support from the city of Miami Beach a year. So
For, not just for seawalls, but for their whole
yeah, for
program.
their entire for resilience efforts in general.
But I'm glad to see you guys working hard on this.
Okay.
You allowing me to sleep.
Okay, James?
Great presentation as always, Dr. Gassman. So, what about to building a seawall where none has existed before? So I understand what you're saying. You go up A1A, get past Northeast 18th Street and into the hotels along the beach, and then there's Lauderdale Beach neighborhood, and then you're at Oakland Park Boulevard and you have the Gulf. Are we gonna be building seawalls all along there? And those big ass homes that are in Lauderdale Beach are gonna have seawalls? And what about the wave along A1A further down, you know?
So to date, we are not permitting seawalls on the beach side of our community. There are retaining walls. The wave wall is a great example of a retaining wall. You can think of it as a tidal barrier to some degree, but there's also openings in that tidal barrier. So that's not that's probably not the direction that anybody in the city wants to go, because our beach is a critical economic driver for us. But if you look on the intercoastal side, there's only a few places on the intercoastal side that still retain the natural quality of what was there. I mean, even Birch State Park has seawalled almost its entire border.
And also, the beach is a federally managed program, so the federal government controls what happens in that area.
Coastal construction
Well,
control.
Greg and then Ralph.
Do you feel like the city, there's enough competent design construction companies that do say seawall, build seawalls in our area?
Might be a better question for building code or for
Yes,
Rare
there are.
Susan
Okay.
Engineers.
Contractors.
I think the key is that they follow the guidelines that are in the ordinance.
Just want to make sure there's enough to create a competitive environment for pricing.
Ralph and then Mike. And then me.
Great presentation, Dr. Gassman. What has any thought been given to like the C13 canal where you've got Pompano Beach to the north and it's contiguously located and letting Fort Lauderdale with their seawalls not going to be, in participating with the city of Fort Lauderdale?
Well, because of the Broward County land use ordinance, every highly influenced community, which there are 13 within Broward County, all of them have to be in compliance with this ordinance. So everybody at a minimum is building to 5. Now, in Pompano, they might be able to build to 9, because that's, our code says not more than 6, but their code may say 9. But everybody has the same requirement that's in the community. They've got to develop this ordinance and, you know, well past the deadline for developing this ordinance to be compliant with the Broward County code. So everybody who has to put up a new seawall, whether you live in Hollywood or you live in Fort Lauderdale or you live in Pumpkin, have got to do it under these guidelines.
Gotcha.
Mike?
Follow on, Greg, to your question about seawall contractors, marine contractors, so it seems as of now, they're from everybody I know that's on the water, if they need to get something done with bow lift or seawall or anything, that they're getting the job done, but I think obviously this type of work is not going away anytime soon, will likely accelerate, I would think, you know, given the age of, you know, so many of these properties, these seawalls, so a friend of mine owns a company that does this work and told me that, and I would love to help him out if I could, but he told me essentially that all of these contractors are quote pirates. And the reason why they're pirates is because they have nowhere to put their barges and their equipment if they're off work, right? If they're not on another dock and they don't have another job after, there's nowhere to put their barges. Like we don't have anywhere in the city of Fort Lauderdale. What they're doing, and I'm sure the city's aware of it, is finding a piece of an empty vacant lot and loading their barges from vacant lots, you know, and then going and doing so. So they have a real serious challenge with how they're operating their businesses. And I think it's an opportunity for the city of Fort Lauderdale, maybe in other cities, to look at Port Everglades at maybe, you know, using berths over there, renting berths or doing something, because I think these companies would be a lot more, from what I understand, a lot more efficient if they had means to actually loading and they didn't have to essentially break the law to operate their businesses. So they've got challenges, yeah.
And you've got, again, code enforcement in the room has just heard what you said. That is certainly something that they look for when they're out and about, for either neighbors complaining that there's this barge that keeps showing up behind my house, or that you've got a property owner who's an absentee owner, they have a vacant lot, and they keep getting calls from their next door neighbor saying, somebody's using your dock.
Yes,
So-
yeah, I'm sure code is well aware of this, you know, I think it's an opportunity that we try to figure out a solution for this. I know that there's only so much real estate that the city owns, but we do have Port Everglades, and that's a county thing, I know, but I think it's an opportunity to find.
I have a question going back to the first slide where you showed the improvement in the seawall and seawall in the road here. Water goes where water wants to go. That improvement is an improvement. Somebody else can flood it.
So, yeah, so I get asked this question all the time. So if you put a boat in the ocean, water that it displaces, where does it go?
That's a trick question.
It's not a trick question, it's the same question. And the answer is, ocean is essentially infinite, which means that if you put a boat in it, the amount of displacement cannot be detected.
Not detected. It did go somewhere, but you cannot detect it.
Because the ocean is essentially infinite.
It's not measurable,
Boats,
yeah.
Not measurable. And
So-
you keep doing this.
I often
it's,
get asked, my neighbor just put up a new seawall, now they're gonna flood me. No, the ocean's not gonna be any higher than it was before.
All right, Peter.
So Chair, I asked, subject, this relates to the specific question. Do we have any idea how many?
I think that we probably could generate the number. I don't have that number at hand. But I'll make this concession. Either after we have cited people for having very low seawalls, or they've started to get impacted in their homes because tidal flows keep impacting their home. Or they have a structure that is so low that it's being impacted all the time. The market evolution is that they sell that property for the value of the land, and somebody comes in and raises everything. And so this is a fairly unusual circumstances where someone's gonna make the decision to go ahead and raise their seawalls rather than consider the fact that their structure is not going to be resilient moving forward. You know, one of the things that I'm reminded about is that there was a house that was cited for having a low seawall. They were flooding their entire neighborhood. And it was owned by either an 89 or 98-year-old woman, I don't remember which, but she said, you can raise my seawall when I die. And that is sort of what's happening, is that the seawalls get raised when the property owner is willing to let the existing structure die.
Would I get flood insurance on waterfront property at an elevation or elevation?
Yes. I don't. The answer is, can you get insurance? Yeah, you can get insurance. But the flood insurance is changing. Correct. And actually, it's starting to be a process now where if you have windstorm insurance, they're starting to require that you have flood insurance in order to qualify for the windstorm.
Insurance thing is crazy, cray all around.
Another issue.
It's a whole nother issue. All right, and you have, in our packet, we have the seawall assessment study. Can you speak a little bit about that as well?
So I'm gonna let Code jump in here and talk about their efforts to enforce this ordinance. I don't know who's gonna come up and chat about that. Have a slide in this presentation that they can talk about. And I'm gonna jump in very briefly on what the city's doing because Raris has a whole presentation. Okay. This is Dorian.
Good afternoon, how are you? And I'm sorry, I apologize, I didn't hear that well. As you can see.
Slide. And talk about what you guys are doing.
Okay, so first of all, I did bring some copies of the ordinance. So I'll just leave these here, whoever's interested. So basically, the slide in front of you on the TV is showing the cases overall since 2016. So we're mainly focusing on 2023 because we do have some cases that are still open from 2023. However, 27 eight were still open from the 27. Some of them are pending special magistrate, some of them had a timeline to complete the seawall. So they may have like a reinspection that's coming up, so on and so forth. And we also have some cases that kind of monitoring, because when we do cite them, we do need to have a lot of evidence when we do take them to court. So just as Dr. Gassman had stated, when we're citing properties, the water has to either affect the adjacent property next door or the right of way. So when we do, most of our complaints come in, or most of our cases are complaint driven. When we go out there, we look at the water, we try to take pictures, video, try to get as much evidence as we can. We also collaborate with stormwater team in case we missed anything or we do need some expert opinions on the case. We also have a boat, like she stated earlier, that we use. We use the boat proactively and reactive. We do go out and get kind of like an extra eye from the back end of the property that helps with a lot of our cases. And we also, if we see anything out there on the water proactively, we can cite as well.
So, if I'm reading this correctly, since 2016, we've only issued 154 citations for seawalls that were problematic and needed to be fixed.
Correct. So
And
again,
there's only 8 open cases left.
well, the cases that are open, like I said, they may have been cited, it's just
What you
in the
call it.
process.
The other ones are closed
The other ones are closed.
and they resulted in seawalls.
Compliance, correct.
That's not bad.
Not bad considering 18,000 privately owned.
Really?
So yeah, we do have some cases that were closed too that may not have been, we may have received a complaint. The water was only on their property. It didn't affect the adjacent properties or the right of way, so therefore they're not in violation.
Oh, so of the 100 and
You
whatever
can flood
citations.
yourself all day long.
Yes,
Yes,
basically,
that's right.
You
yeah.
cannot flood your neighbor and you cannot flood the road.
Gotcha.
You
Okay,
can
well,
flood yourself all day long.
and if I were to put that on a GIS, would it show hotspots in places where it's
Well, I mean, this is the current code cases, and what you can see is that currently Riviera Isles is an area where we've got quite a few from last year. And some of that has to do with the fact that old structures were knocked down and they removed the seawall as part of their demolition. And it takes time to build a new one. And so they started flooding a neighborhood that had been fairly dry for quite some time, because now the water was flowing over this now vacant property, which before had a structure on it.
Got it. Oh, sounds good. Anybody have any questions?
No, is there anything on the bottom of that, or that's the whole?
That's the whole list.
Okay.
And then, of course, just be mindful, like, so we have one case that's open in 2024. We also have one on Marietta Drive that we're gonna be monitoring. So most of our complaints come in during king tide season, so king tide starts next week. That's when we'll generally get most of our complaints.
Okay.
So, and like I said, we're out on the boat proactively as well as reactive. And that has been a huge help in seawall cases.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the slide, what you're recognizing is that this was our first year under the seawall ordinance that established the new minimum. And so that was learning time. Learned a lot, and we applied it in 2017. I think in part what happened in 2023 is we had a number of relatively high tides that expanded where people were experiencing flooding because the tides were so much higher. And again, we're back into compliance. We've only had one this year, but we're yet to hit the king tide cycle.
Right.
Okie dokie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Okay, no.
And then, to your point, Marilyn, yes, there's also city-owned seawalls. We've completed a number of them. There's a number that we're currently under design. And we have an existing seawall master plan that dictates the different places that we are currently looking at seawalls that have already been categorized as fixed within 5 years, fixed within 10 years, fixed within 15. And we're starting a second seawall master plan. And again, Rares is gonna take over and talk about those things. Is your presentation embedded? Okay, it's here.
Is it on?
No, it's embedded in the minute, so we have to just give us a minute to bring it in. Okay.
Yep, or we don't have the PowerPoint?
No, she's here.
Well, it's gonna be, I don't know how to move this up and down. My name is Rares Patrica. I'm with the Stormwater Engineering Group. So we're actually the ones that work with the contractors to get the city seawalls. That's way to kind of show this.
Next slide, please.
Rares, you can advance. You should be able to advance.
Okay, so it's very hard to see. So the city did start a seawall assessment study in 2018. It was done by BCC Engineering. So they looked at about 4.4 miles of city-owned seawalls that come out. So based on that report, they categorized them from high priority, 0 to 5 planned replacement, and then from 5 to 10, or 6 to 10, and beyond. So Just earlier this year, we actually started a new assessment report, because it's been, 7 years. So some of these old seawalls, they were decrepit back then, they've gotten even worse, so. We're in the process of finalizing this new report, which also includes seawalls from city facilities and parks, the old report. City facilities. So, again, if we can center on it, so this is, can we go down a little bit? So this is basically what was generated by the 2018 report, so obviously there were 35 seawalls. These were the most high priority ones from 0 to 5, 6 to 10. So since 2018, we've been actively replacing the seawalls, so these are all the ones that we've replaced. It's been, the Mola was really small one, Cordova Road, it's a big one, 2200 linear feet, Southeast End, Isle of Palms, Freon Solas. So, slide. Actually, can we go to the next one after this? I would have brought one, yeah, on my phone. Now. Okay, so just to summarize it, in 2018, we replaced about 60. About 60. Alphonse 900 feet, Mola was small, Cordova was 2200, Hendrix Isles was 2 seawalls, Merle Fog was collapsed by the park.
Sorry, really quick. Merle Fog is 130 linear feet there, right?
Yes.
So it's on the other side of it, there's still, it's all wide open, right? I think if I'm not mistaken, on 2 sides, it's literally just a wall and then open on, not open, but
So-
lower on 2 sides,
So
right?
what- the seawall to the south of it that's
Yeah.
lower, it's owned by the condo building.
Okay.
So that's a private seawall.
So why would we bother doing that there and using usable life on a seawall if the, you know what I mean? Like if the other ones, if we're just gonna flood there anyways, you know?
So the
Real
Merle Fog
fresh.
actually was a collapsed seawall,
Okay.
collapsed to the ground, and mangroves were grown, so it wasn't actually a planned replacement. Wasn't
Mangroves are a
actually,
good thing, no?
sorry,
We like mangroves.
but this one was endangering and the land was starting to wash
I
away,
got
so
you.
it was a more
Okay.
of a response.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask you a little bit about the money?
It's a private seawall, we would have been cited and told you have to raise it up, so.
So when is the condos wall gonna start falling down? That'd be nice, right? Not for the owners.
Falls in decent shape.
Is it? Okay.
And it's compared to the height of Merle Fog seawall before we did the replacement, it's actually about a foot higher than that. So that seawall's probably in the range of 2 to 2.5 already. So it's got life left in it. It doesn't mean it won't overtop, but the number of times it's gonna overtop at that height is much lower than what was happening at Merle Fog. Merle Fog was part of the seawall master plan for replacement. And there'll probably be additional work done on the portion of Merle Fog that we haven't replaced. But again, that other portion is in good shape and it's high enough that it's not currently over.
So the portion leading up to the bridge, is that's city owned property too? Is that part of Merle Fog? We just decided not, we don't need to do it.
Well, that one wasn't collapsed.
Okay,
So
okay.
again, it was an emergency
Yeah, yeah.
repair.
Okay.
We got money from parks to do
Got it.
this, because literally the fall
Perfect.
fell into the water.
Perfect. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So talking about the $16 million, give us an idea of where the sources of funding are, because I assume it's multiple sources of funding.
So the seawalls, typically they come from the general fund, which is roadways, and we applied for a couple of grants, so we got some grants. But when you build a seawall, it's the actual structural seawall, which is the main cost, which is I would say about 90% of the cost, and then you also have to do the back of wall drainage. It's like catch basins, tidal valves, basically handle the drainage. That one comes out of the 470 stormwater.
So we use stormwater for enough of the construction,
For the
but
back
for
of the
the
wall.
ancillary.
Correct, so I would say it's about a 90-10.
Almost all of these seawalls are adjacent to the roadway.
So we needed to clear the roadway, yeah, okay, good.
So I just did a quick calculation. 4360 linear feet to the 16 million, it's 3,700 per linear foot. I thought the cost of doing your seawall was around $2,000 per linear foot.
So that varies a lot too, and I've seen the prices climb up and down since 2018, so the way contractors work, For instance, a Cordova seawall, you know, that's 2,200 feet and it's about $7 million, right? So if you look at it, it's not, but then we
Girl Fog was 10,000 square.
exactly, so the smaller the seawall is typically, they still have to mobilize, they have to get over, they have to order the sheet piles and they have, so generally you'll see, the smaller the seawall, the higher the price per year. The larger the seawall. I think ranging around 5,000.
Thing you have to consider though is that city is installing what are called sheet pile seawalls. We are taking sheet pile and again, Maris is gonna explain this, but we're taking sheet pile and we're putting it all the way down to bedrock. That's not how you build a residential seawall.
Okay.
And
So
the
it's
reason for that is that in the situation where we have a roadway that's adjacent to a seawall, that seawall is being built to keep the upland up, to secure the roadway and to ensure that it's not gonna erode into the water.
Which is very different from somebody's
Very
property
different.
that
Someone-
backs up to a waterway.
Yes.
I'll show you guys a graph. But
Is that including the drainage that you're putting into, or that's?
typically, yes, and that
So
includes
that's
the
in there.
design
Yeah.
and permitting
Yeah.
of the CI. So just to kind of give you an idea, there's still a lot of demand for seawalls. This is what we completed thus far. 2 of them are in design right now. One is our engineer, Sebastian and Seville, which is the Central Beach Lines. But we still have a lot of seawalls that need to be replaced because they get over top at 0 to 5. And the new report is gonna come out later this year. I'm sure it's gonna add to it. So we're looking at a shortfall of these are important. Because eventually, once the seawall, the rebar is showing and starts eroding, it's just downhill from there. You get salt water behind it.
So how much would it cost us to finish that first list?
So right now, we're looking, we did about 60 million, and again, this was just a prorated, you know, we're still looking at about 7,500 linear feet. And that's probably somewhere between $20-30 million over the next 5 or 6 years.
A lot of money.
If you remember the Renew Lauderdale presentation we did in January, we estimated $106 million in seawall / shoreline needs.
Yeah, I remember that presentation. There was not enough money in the world to fund that. Okay.
And these are only the most severe ones, the 0 to 5. So, we go down, this is just a graphic, just kind of to show you a little bit what we typically do. So your existing seawall, most of the ones that we take out are, you know, they have a concrete, even if they have a concrete, they have a, you know, rock with cement, basically. So, and it gets over top, sometimes they range at like 1.5 NABD. So typically what we do when we build a new seawall, we cut off the cap and we drive new sheet piles in front of it. They go down to about 36 feet into the ground, into the mud line, right? So it's vibratory. So then we build a concrete cap on it. So you actually win some, you gain some, because we cut it right here, you gain about 2 or 3 feet and you have a nice sheet pile cantilever seawall that's got a lifetime of 50 years and beyond.
When we do the new seawalls, if a homeowner does a new seawall, brand new, and you said that they had to mitigate and put some opportunities for natural habitat. We're not obligated to do that?
We are replacing seawalls. We are not building seawalls where there were no seawalls before.
Oh, you're replacing, you're not
We're
building.
replacing, we're not
So
building.
if you were
we're not-
building a new one, you would have to.
So the Himarshi Canal area is a great example, and that's one of the ones that are on our list moving forward, is that the Himarshi Canal is a combination of seawalls and natural shoreline. So if we build new seawalls in the Himarshi Canal area, we will have to create some sort of habitat seaward of the new seawall.
But that is a city policy decision. It may.
No.
No, well, let me ask it a
It's an
different way.
ordinance.
It's the ordinance, okay. But the city could take the policy position that we will go beyond the ordinance. And when we replace a seawall, okay, we will also try to mitigate and provide some natural habitat. Money, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to
No,
understand.
you're absolutely right, and we've had a lot of conversation about living seawalls and, you know, placing panels, habitat panels on our seawalls, et cetera. But when you're looking at a situation of trying to protect roadways and trying to protect upland properties. If we have to make a decision about adding an enhancement that provides for a living seawall component or fixing two seawalls rather than one,
All right, it's a
we are
policy
currently
decision.
opting for fixing two seawalls.
Rather, understood, just wanna make sure that everybody understands that.
And again, we're not mandated to unless we are replacing natural shoreline with a new seawall.
Gotcha, okay, moving along.
And a lot of times, most of these seawalls that we replace, people wanna park their boats and it's kinda hard to have something protruding out of there, like Old Cordova, Isle of Palms, I think Hendricks Isles, Isle of Palm doesn't, but I would say about 70% people do wanna park their boats in front of it.
Woo-hoo.
But again, this is a graphic, again, you know, the sheet piles is basically, so the top of wall elevation is a 5 NAVD. You know, we have sheet piles, they're protected with corrosive, so it doesn't get the salt water, they have different epoxy, we have a structural engineer that's very picky about that, make sure they don't get dented and again, lifespan of about 50 years. So this is again a typical example, you know, you've seen this slides before, how Cordova used to be flooded. You wanna go down again? I remember I presented here when Cordova was being built, so this is basically what it looks like right now. You always have to put a catch basin, you know, tile out.
And the water doesn't come around because the ocean is infinite.
Correct. It seems to be working, we had some lessons learned with some valves that we're no longer using, again, this is Isle of Palm before and after, you know.
Difference. It's nice, it's good.
And I think you've seen this before, you know, some of the other benefits is, you know, obviously minimize tidal flooding of the adjacent properties, improved access for pedestrians and traffic. Protect the adjacent, especially Cordova and Isle of Palm, you start seeing creeps in the asphalt, because if the seawall is not sound, it starts falling into the ocean. Improve drainage and maintain property value.
And I think one of the things that's important is that one of the big projects that they finished this year were the Las Olas seawalls on the south side. And that's an area, excuse me, that's an area that's been impacted often by tidal flooding that has come into the roadway. So now that we've raised those seawalls that are at the terminus of those canals on the south side, our hope is to see a reduction in the tidal flooding that's impacting Las Olas. I don't think it's gonna completely prevent it, but it's gonna reduce it quite a bit.
Right. Yeah, we're making progress, Okay, all right, thank you guys very much for all these presentations, bringing us up to date. Thank you. Item number 3 on the agenda is just one of the things that we monitor, which is the CIP financial report and the water breaks. Is there anything under the water breaks that is new and unusual and we should bring into our attention? Last month's water breaks? Yes.
I see it on current social media, there's an outcry about claims of sewage leak in Lakewood Village,
Oh, yeah, I saw
Third
that.
Avenue. Do you know anything about
Yeah,
that?
there was a back bid through the pipe, where basically there's a clog in the pipe that caused it to backflow through one of the manholes. We sent a crew there yesterday with Baxter truck that did cleanup and pumping down, but they did not resolve the issue, so it continued. They were out there again this morning with a CCTV truck and additional resources to resolve the clog and to open up the line.
That's typical maintenance, it happens all the time. I don't know why people get so upset about it, it happens. Thank you.
My understanding it was a very, very low volume flow coming out, roughly 5 gallons.
Yeah, you'd say that, that's good, yes.
All right, so now we're going on to item number 4, general discussion and comments. Kaplan, Dan, you first.
This is a question to Alan. The bridge, Northeast 15th Avenue Bridge from Wilton Manors into Fort Lauderdale. There's some sewer work, pipe replacement going on there. It's the Wilton Manors work. Can you provide any?
I know nothing about it.
So they're connecting into our system there, don't they? Isn't that where?
They are one of our large users, so they
Right.
you know, because but I don't know anything about that particular project.
Okay, but this is 15th Avenue is or it's gonna be closed from about 17th Court just to the bridge.
I'll have to find, I don't.
Okay, Peter?
I would like to have, so put in an email that's been circulated, subject of flood zones and next agenda as soon as possible.
I would put that on the next agenda. What particularly about floods?
Well, FEMA has recently revised that like to get staff's understanding how FEMA did that. So try to understand true flooding risk is, comes from, is it coming from the ocean, is it coming from to go understand where the risks are. It's a big subject to get your hands around, but it's pretty interesting.
Peter, is this dealing with the theme of flood maps recently released?
Yes, kind of. I'm not asking specifically why have those been changed. I'm really asking what is staff's understanding methodology as to how they prepare those and how those flood zones relate, if at all, to rainfall events.
Well,
Maybe Mark Haggerty come in.
yeah, I was gonna suggest Mark Haggerty, because he's working on that, so we'll ask him on.
Yeah, it's primarily an elevation driven mapping.
But it basically says, if you read the methodology, we're from the government, trust us.
And that wasn't good enough, Peter?
When you were the government, Peter, we trusted you. All right, yes, I have one too, then, so you first.
You all know that I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce for Lauderdale. That my first appointment to this committee came as a result of the Chamber of Commerce having a seat. So I still go to the Government Affairs. I'm still a member of the Government Affairs Council, and I got asked a question. And I'm glad you're here and you're here. You probably know the answer. I know the subject, but I don't know the answer. If there's a major storm, particular hurricane, 99.5% of the energy goes to getting ready, making sure we batten down during the storm, then recover. Is there anything in the documentation about reconstruction? In other words, I know there are some counties and cities that have, if this happens, then we know that this part of the city is going to get hammered. We're not just going to recover it, we're going to reconstruct it. It's subtle language, I know, but there's a difference between recovery and reconstruction. Is there a plan for what has to be reconstructed in Broward County and Norfolk County?
So we are governed in our recovery by the local mitigation strategy, which is a
Broward County.
big fat document that's developed by Broward County and we have input to. To my knowledge, that it's called blue sky planning. Try to figure it out before something bad happens. To my knowledge, at this time, I don't believe that they have identified what I would describe as critical recovery zones, where they might say, if something really bad happens here, maybe we should rebuild, or if something bad happens here, maybe this is an area that we need to spend more time and effort to recover it from. There was an effort quite some time ago to identify iconic locations.
Okay.
And those iconic locations were a way of saying, if something bad happens in this location, this has a community or cultural value that we want to preserve.
That's a helpful answer. Is tape recorder off?
You're
I think-
continuing to be reported as part of the YouTube/FTL.
Anyway, I think what happened was one of the major stakeholders is beach council and tourism and all, in the marine industry and all of that. So from a business standpoint, it's the barrier island. And if we get hit and we're gonna get wet, barrier islands gonna take.
The initial wave hit. Yes. But it's also higher than the rest of the city.
Would you like Jennifer Torado to come and talk to us about the Broward County plan?
Well, it would be helpful.
Well, think about that. We have to get permission. Okay, I have a question. In the minutes, we sent a communication to the city commission supporting communication to the city commission. Supporting and recommending funding or updating the utility strategic master plan in the 2025 budget. Passed unanimously. Unfortunately, that communication did not get to the commission. Times matter. It will only get to the commission at their next meeting, at which time they are voting on the budget. Was there any movement on getting them to advance the money into the 2025 budget utility strategic master plan update
There's $3 million in that budget, in the budget for next
for this master plan?
year. Yes.
Oh, excellent. So I don't have to go and ask them. It's in there.
Unless something has changed from the first budget hearing.
God is good.
That money was.
God is good. All right. Who's that?
Yes.
It's Blocks.
In our last meeting.
Yeah.
I requested that we get copies of any movement of money within the budget. And I don't know if you got it or
Oh,
not.
I did. I saw
But
it.
I got it, and I wanna thank you, but I also wanna tell you, I haven't read all that yet.
But it's possible to do it and it's been done and we can
Yeah.
spend time on it. Excellent. All right.
That's a lot.
Okay, James.
When you spoke up about the meeting minutes, it made me think. At the last meeting, I asked if we get copies of the final recommendations that came.
We did. They sent it to us. I have it. I got it. I'm sure.
Did it go to everyone?
Yeah, sent it to everyone. Check your email.
Okay, sorry.
Check, it's from Vicky, right?
I believe it's from me or infrastructure.
I think it came to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
It
Sorry.
could be from the address infrastructure itself.
Yes.
How do we get out of here?
How do we get out of here now? Now we get out of here. What's that?
Park.
Oh, I parked in City Hall.
City Hall.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Is there a way, I mean,
That's your donation.
Go next door to the store in Thomasetti.
and Thomas said it again.
Beef up.
Yeah.
All right,
They're
now,
right next door.
now we are adjourned. Thank you very much. So,
These are for City Hall parking.